On a warm Sunday morning in Manila, Manny Pacquiao walked discreetly through the bustling streets of the neighborhood where he grew up, far from the spotlights that always followed him. Dressed in simple clothes with a cap pulled low over his eyes, he sought moments of normalcy that his worldwide fame rarely allowed. The familiar smell of street food and the sound of Tagalog voices around him transported him back to his childhood days, when life was difficult, but somehow simpler. Every corner of those narrow streets held memories of a time when he was just a poor boy dreaming of a better future. As he passed by a small sari-sari store, his eyes were drawn to a thin, middle-aged man carefully arranging some sardine cans in the display window. There was something familiar about that face marked by time and hard work, something that made his heart race inexplicably. The man moved with difficulty, leaning slightly on a simple cane, but his movements were precise and dignified. Manny stopped abruptly on the sidewalk, feeling a wave of recognition that left him momentarily breathless. Manny's hands began to tremble slightly as he watched the stranger, who suddenly didn't seem so strange anymore. Fragmented memories began to form in his mind, like pieces of a puzzle that had remained incomplete for years. The shape of the eyes, the particular way the man frowned when concentrating, even the way he held objects. Everything awakened echoes of a distant and painful past. It was impossible, Manny thought, but his instinct told him this encounter was no mere coincidence. The boxer felt his legs grow heavy, as if the ground beneath his feet had turned to quicksand. 25 years had passed since that night that changed the course of his life forever, a night he could never completely forget. During all those years of success, fame, and achievements, there had always been a debt of gratitude that remained unpaid, a face he had tried in vain to find again. Now, in front of that small store, fate seemed to have conspired to bring back the ghost of his most vulnerable past. With his heart pounding in his chest, Manny took a step toward the store, knowing his life was about to take another unexpected turn. The man hadn't noticed him yet, focused on his simple but important task of organizing products for the workday. It was as if time had stopped, suspending that moment loaded with possibilities and memories. Manny took a deep breath, gathering courage to approach and discover if his suspicions were correct, if fate had really placed in his path the man who once saved his life. Manny's mind was immediately transported back to 1998, when he was just a young 16-year-old boxer trying to survive on the streets of General Santos City. Back then, his family lived in extreme poverty, and every peso earned in improvised rings was essential to put food on the table. Nights were especially difficult, when hunger pressed and the future seemed like an endless road covered with impossible obstacles to overcome. He clearly remembered that December night, when he was returning home after a humiliating defeat that had cost him the few pesos he hoped to earn. Tropical rain fell torrentially on the poorly lit streets, turning the asphalt into a dark mirror that reflected the few city lights. Manny walked with his head down, soaked to the bone, carrying not only the weight of defeat but also the guilt of returning home empty-handed once again. His worn-out sneakers let water in with every step, and his empty stomach hurt as much as his wounded pride. It was one of those nights when hope seemed to have completely abandoned his young heart, leaving only the emptiness of a dream that might never come true. That's when the three men appeared at the dark corner, blocking his path with malicious smiles and clearly dangerous intentions. They had seen Manny at the local boxing club and knew he always carried some money after fights, no matter how little it was. The situation quickly turned into a nightmare when they realized he had absolutely nothing, and their frustration turned into gratuitous violence. Manny tried to run, but he was too weak from hunger and exhaustion, and soon found himself cornered in a dead-end alley. The blows began to rain down on his body, already bruised from the previous fight, and Manny felt this could really be his last night. They didn't just want his money, they wanted to take out all the frustrations of their own miserable lives on him. That's when a firm voice echoed through the alley, ordering them to stop immediately. A man of medium height, dressed in simple worker's clothes, positioned himself between Manny and his attackers with courage that defied the logic of the situation. He didn't look like anything special, but there was something in his posture that made the criminals hesitate. The stranger didn't use violence or threats. He simply talked to the men as if they were lost children who needed to find their way home. His words carried serene wisdom and genuine compassion that gradually dissolved the tension of the moment. After a few minutes that seemed like an eternity, the attackers simply walked away, leaving Manny injured and confused on the wet ground. The man then knelt beside him, helped him up, and without saying a word about what had happened, offered him something that would change his perspective forever. Not just food and shelter for that night, but also a lesson about the strength of human kindness. The man who saved Manny that rainy night was named Rodrigo Effect, a simple mechanic who worked in a small workshop on the outskirts of the city. His house was even more modest than the Pacquiao family's, just 2 simple rooms where he lived alone after the premature death of his wife from a disease they couldn't treat adequately. Despite his own poverty, Rodrigo never hesitated to help anyone in need, as if sharing the little he had was the most natural thing in the world. That night, he took Manny to his house without asking questions, without expecting anything in return. Rodrigo prepared a simple soup with the few ingredients he had in his pantry, some vegetables, a little rice, and basic seasonings. But for Manny, hungry and hurt, that was the most delicious meal he had ever tasted. While the young boxer ate in silence, Rodrigo gently tended to his wounds with the few medicines he possessed. There was no drama in his actions, just silent and caring efficiency that spoke of a deeply good soul. His hands, calloused by hard work, were surprisingly gentle when cleaning cuts and applying improvised bandages. During the hours that followed, Rodrigo shared with Manny not just his food and his house, but also his life philosophy. He spoke about how he had learned from his late wife that true wealth wasn't in money but in the ability to make a difference in other people's lives, even with small gestures. He told how, just even earning very little as a mechanic, he always found ways to help needy neighbors, whether fixing bicycles for free for children or sharing his meals with homeless people. His calm voice and kind eyes conveyed wisdom that didn't come from books, but from the experience of someone who had chosen to make love for others his personal religion. When morning came, Rodrigo not only offered breakfast to Manny, but also gave him something the young man would keep forever: a small wooden crucifix that had belonged to his wife. It was a simple piece, hand-carved, but it carried all the faith and hope of that humble family. Rodrigo explained that his wife had always believed that God put people in our path at the right time, and that he felt meeting Manny had been no coincidence. He asked for only one thing in return: that the young man never give up on his dreams, no matter how impossible they seemed. Before saying goodbye, Rodrigo walked with Manny to the nearest jeepney stop and gave him the last pesos he had in his pocket for the fare back home. The mechanic refused any promise of future payment, simply saying that life had its ways of repaying kindness when we least expect it. When the jeepney departed, taking Manny back to his difficult reality, the young man looked through the window and saw Rodrigo waving with a genuine smile, as if he had just received the greatest gift in the world. It was the last time they would see each other for 25 years, but that farewell moment would be forever engraved in both their memories. Back in the present, Manny observed the man in the sari-sari store more carefully, and every detail confirmed his growing suspicions. Even with his hair now graying and his face marked by the years, those were definitely the same kind eyes that had looked at him with compassion on that distant night. The way Rodrigo held a can of condensed milk was identical to how he had held the bowl of warm soup so many years ago, with care and respect, as if each object were precious. Time had left its marks, but the essence of that good man remained intact, radiating the same serenity that had once saved the life of a desperate young man. Manny slowly approached the entrance of the small store, his heart racing with each step. For a moment, he considered simply walking past and avoiding the emotional confrontation that would surely come, but something stronger than his apprehension pulled him forward. It was as if an invisible force drew him toward this encounter that fate had orchestrated with cinematic perfection. His years of fame and fortune suddenly seemed insignificant before the magnitude of this moment. He was about to reunite with the man who had changed the course of his life when he needed it most. When he finally entered the store, the familiar sound of the bell hanging on the door made Rodrigo look up from his work. For a few seconds, both stared at each other in silence, and Manny could see the exact moment when recognition sparkled in the older man's eyes. It wasn't immediate recognition of the world celebrity Manny had become, but something much deeper, the memory of a wounded and hungry young man he had sheltered decades ago. Time seemed to freeze in that magical instant when two souls that had briefly touched in the past reunited under completely different circumstances. Rodrigo gently dropped the can he was holding, his hands trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from pure emotion. His eyes filled with unshed tears as he studied the face of the man before him, trying to reconcile the image of the desperate boy from his memory with the world champion who was now in his humble store. It was impossible not to recognize those determined eyes, even now shining with contained tears of gratitude. The physical transformation was obvious, but something in Manny's nervous smile was exactly the same as the young man he had fed and comforted so many years ago. The retired mechanic finally broke the silence with a voice choked with emotion, asking softly if it was really him, the young boxer he had helped on a rainy December night. Manny nodded, unable to form words at first, feeling decades of repressed gratitude finally finding an opportunity for expression. It was one of those rare moments in life when the past and present collide so intensely that they forever transform the future. There, in that small store full of basic products, two lives were about to reconnect in a way neither could have imagined. Manny finally found his voice and, with tears in his eyes, expressed the gratitude he had carried in his heart all these years. He explained how that night had been a turning point in his life, not just because Rodrigo had saved him from physical violence, but because he had shown him that genuine kindness still existed in the world. During all his years of success, from his first significant victories to becoming world champion, the wooden crucifix Rodrigo had given him never left his side. It was always in his equipment bag, reminding him where he came from and the values that should guide his journey. Every famous knockout, every title won, carried with it the memory of that man who had believed in him when he himself had lost faith. Rodrigo listened in respectful silence, clearly touched to learn that his small gesture from decades ago had such a profound impact. For him, helping Manny that night had simply been what any decent person would do, not something extraordinary that deserved special recognition. His tears now flowed freely, not from sadness, but from the deep joy of discovering that his compassion had germinated and flourished in ways he had never imagined. It was like discovering that a casually planted seed had become a majestic tree that offered shade and fruit to thousands of people around the world. As they talked, Manny discreetly observed the conditions of the small store and Rodrigo's current life. It was obvious that the man who once saved his life continued living with very limited resources, but with the same dignity and contentment he had shown decades ago. His clothes were simple but clean, his movements still carried that characteristic gentleness, and his smile maintained the same genuine warmth. The cane beside him suggested that age and hard work had taken their physical toll, but his spirit seemed as vibrant as on the night he extended his hand to a desperate young man. The conversation revealed that Rodrigo had continued his life as a mechanic until a few years ago, when health problems forced him to retire early. The small store was his current livelihood, a modest operation that barely covered his basic needs, but which he conducted with the same care and integrity that characterized everything he did. He had never remarried after his first wife's death, dedicating himself entirely to work and small acts of charity in the community. His neighbors knew him as someone always willing to help, whether carrying heavy shopping for elderly people or fixing small appliances for free for needy families. Manny felt his heart fill with growing determination. During all these years of success, he had always wondered how he could adequately repay the kindness of that man who changed his life. Now, faced with the opportunity that fate offered him, he knew exactly what he needed to do. It wouldn't just be a matter of financial help, although that was important, but of publicly honoring the memory of Rodrigo's kindness and using his global platform to amplify the message that small acts of love can transform lives in unimaginable ways. This would be his chance to not only settle a personal debt, but to inspire millions of people around the world. In the days that followed that emotional reunion, Manny couldn't get Rodrigo out of his mind. Discreetly, he began investigating more about his savior's current life, discovering details that only confirmed his determination to act. Rodrigo lived alone in a small rented house a few blocks from his store, a simple structure that had seen better days, but which he kept impeccably clean and organized. His neighbors spoke of him with genuine affection, describing him as the type of person who always showed up when someone needed help, even when he himself was facing difficulties. The boxer discovered that Rodrigo faced significant health challenges, joint problems that made physical work painful, and a heart condition that required expensive medications he often couldn't afford. Despite this, the retired mechanic never complained and continued finding ways to help others, whether offering wise advice to neighborhood youth or sharing his meals with local homeless people. He was exactly the same compassionate man who had extended his hand to a desperate young man so many years ago, proving that true kindness is not circumstantial, but an intrinsic quality of character. Manny began to elaborate a careful plan that would honor Rodrigo without embarrassing him or making him feel like an object of charity. Knowing his savior's humble nature, he knew that a direct or ostentatious approach would be immediately rejected. Instead, he needed to find a way to improve Rodrigo's life in a manner that seemed natural and deserved, not a gift from someone famous. The idea that began to take shape in his mind was both simple and deeply meaningful, a way to not only help Rodrigo, but to use his story to inspire acts of kindness on a global scale. Secretly, Manny began making arrangements through his assistants and lawyers, always emphasizing the need for absolute discretion. He wanted everything to be perfectly prepared before revealing his plans to Rodrigo. Every detail was thought out meticulously, from legal documentation to practical aspects of implementation. It wasn't just about solving Rodrigo's immediate problems, but about creating something lasting that would perpetuate the lesson of kindness he had taught decades ago. During this preparation period, Manny discreetly visited the store several more times, always as a regular customer, buying small items and casually chatting with Rodrigo. Each conversation reinforced his conviction that he was doing the right thing. Rodrigo never mentioned his financial or health difficulties, always maintaining a dignified and optimistic posture that was both inspiring and moving. It was exactly this combination of silent strength and genuine kindness that had saved Manny in his youth, and now it would be his turn to give back in a way that would touch not only Rodrigo, but potentially millions of people around the world. 2 weeks after finalizing all legal and practical preparations, Manny decided it was time to put his plan into action. He invited Rodrigo to what he described as a small community event at a local convention center, claiming he needed people from the community to participate in a boxing initiative for youth. Rodrigo, always willing to help, accepted the invitation without hesitation, never imagining he would be the guest of honor at something much more significant. He wore his best shirt, still simple but impeccably ironed, and arrived at the venue at the appointed time, curious about how he could contribute. When Rodrigo entered the convention center, he was surprised to find not just a small community group, but hundreds of people, including journalists, television cameras, and several local personalities. His initial confusion turned to concern. Perhaps he had misunderstood the invitation or arrived at the wrong event. That's when Manny appeared beside him, formally dressed, and gently guided him to the front of the auditorium. The realization that he was somehow the focus of this event left Rodrigo deeply uncomfortable, but Manny's reassuring presence beside him prevented him from running away. With the media and hundreds of spectators watching, Manny took the microphone and began telling the story of a rainy December night in 1998. His voice was loaded with genuine emotion as he described how a simple mechanic had changed the course of his life through an act of selfless kindness. He spared no details about his own vulnerability at that time, the poverty, hunger, despair, and how Rodrigo's compassion not only saved him physically, but showed him that there was still hope in the world. The auditorium fell into absolute silence, absorbing every word of the powerful narrative. Rodrigo remained beside Manny throughout the speech, tears rolling freely down his face as he heard his own kindness being celebrated in a way he never could have imagined. For him, helping Manny had simply been what any decent person would do, not something heroic that deserved public recognition. The genuine humility in his reactions only reinforced the authenticity of the story Manny was sharing. It was impossible not to be touched by the combination of the world champion's eloquent gratitude and the simple man's sincere modesty who had changed his life. When Manny finished his narrative, the auditorium exploded in emotional applause, but the real impact came with his next revelation. He announced that he had bought a larger and more comfortable house for Rodrigo in a safe neighborhood, established a fund to cover all his future medical needs, and created a sustainable small business that would allow him to live with dignity for the rest of his life. More important than that, he declared he was launching a global initiative called the Rodrigo Effect to recognize and support ordinary people who make extraordinary differences in others' lives through simple acts of kindness. It was his way of ensuring that the lesson learned that night in 1998 would continue inspiring future generations. The story of Manny and Rodrigo quickly spread beyond the Philippines' borders, touching hearts around the world through social media and international news coverage. It wasn't just another celebrity charity story. It was a powerful testament about how small acts of kindness can have transformative consequences that reverberate through decades. Thousands of people began sharing their own stories of moments when compassion changed their lives, creating a global wave of recognition for anonymous heroes who exist in all communities. Rodrigo, initially overwhelmed by the sudden attention, gradually began to understand the greater meaning of what had happened. His story wasn't just about him or about Manny, but about the transformative power of human kindness when expressed without expectation of reward. In subsequent interviews, he always redirected the focus from himself to the universal message that everyone has daily opportunities to make a difference in others' lives, even through the smallest gestures. His simple and genuine wisdom resonated with people of all ages and backgrounds, proving that true moral leadership doesn't require titles or positions of power. The Rodrigo Effect grew organically beyond Manny's initial expectations, transforming into a global movement that connected people willing to practice active kindness in their communities. It wasn't about grand gestures or substantial donations, but about paying attention to the needs around us and responding with genuine compassion. Schools began incorporating the story into their moral education curricula. Companies created volunteer programs inspired by the initiative, and individuals around the world began actively seeking opportunities to make a positive difference in others' lives. Months after the public event, Manny visited Rodrigo in his new home, a modest but comfortable dwelling with a small garden where the former mechanic grew vegetables he frequently distributed to needy neighbors. It was exactly the type of property Rodrigo had dreamed of having during his years of hard work, but never imagined he could achieve. Most importantly, however, he continued being exactly the same kind and humble person as always, proving that external circumstances don't change the essence of true character. His health had improved significantly with access to adequate medical treatment, allowing him to actively help in his community again. During this visit, Rodrigo showed Manny a small box where he kept hundreds of letters from people around the world who had been inspired by his story. Letters from children promising to be kinder at school, from adults describing acts of kindness they decided to practice, from entire families who had adopted the philosophy of looking for opportunities to help others. For Rodrigo, these letters were more valuable than any material reward. They were proof that his life message had found fertile ground in hearts around the globe. As the two men read some of these letters together, both understood that that rainy night in 1998 had planted seeds that would continue germinating for generations, proving that no act of genuine love is too small to change the world.
Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next cases.